James, are you around?
Yeah, hello. Hi. Can
How
hear
you
me
doing?
okay?
All right?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Yes, all good.
Nice site plans in the background. Beacon
Yeah,
light.
they're all redundant, essentially.
I like that
But
you've got
it's
a little
nice
bit of
wallpaper.
branding. Yeah, good.
Yeah. No, it's nice wallpaper for the office,
Yeah. I must admit, I kind of looked behind us. I should have put a logo behind me or something.
Well,
I'm going to hand over to you guys. Thank you so much for giving us your time. This is one of the ones I'm really looking forward to, because I always pretend I know what I'm talking about, and then I have to lean on the likes.
don't worry. So do I. It's all good. If I hand over to Sue, just a bit of a quick update on Red Kite Acoustics.
Okay, hi. So yeah, I'm Sue Thoms. I'm a former environmental health officer and now an acoustic consultant, and I run Red Kite Acoustics, which has been officially launched just this year, which might not have been the best year to actually try and turn the company into something more than we are. We've been helping WOMAD with their noise management now since 2007, which was the first year that they moved to Charlton Park, and working on other festivals as well. So we have WOMAD's quite an interesting site, and we'll talk a bit more about some of the fun stuff there a bit later on. I'll hand back to you, James, for the presentation.
Cool, lovely, thank you. Let me try and screen share, he says. Share. What can we see? Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, I can see it.
Yeah, full screen? Yeah, lovely, cool. Okay. Okay. So as background, we'll keep the kind of technical, techie noise stuff to a minimum. If I do kind of rattle through any of that, then please do chuck a question on a Q&A. Sue is going to try and keep on top of them, and she can throw something at me if I just go off on one on noise. So my background, I'm a chartered environmental health practitioner, like Sue. Got a diploma in environmental health, postgrad diploma in Events Ltd management, member of CIH, member of IRSRM. Been working in local authorities in mostly pollution, EP, licensing, and event safety for a little while. So a couple of the events we've been involved with, and we'll sort of view some of these as examples and case studies today. So principally sort of noise control, noise management. It's based on the festival code of practice on environmental noise control at concerts. So this is a 1995 guidance, so commonly referred to as the pop code. I'll just chuck in, there should be a poll just coming up. Just what's your role within events? Just be really useful to kind of get a bit of a feel for what different people's perspectives are, which will kind of steer some of the questions. So I will.
Yeah, just to jump in very quickly. So the poll's been launched, and it looks like it'll be answered in a couple of minutes, and I'll just end the polling and publish it in about another minute.
Lovely, thank you. So 1995 hasn't been reviewed in 24 years. If you just look at the increase in background noise level, the increase in road traffic noise and things, and there's been across the industry a significant kind of increase really in background noise levels, which particularly will come on to some of how that would affect your music noise levels for events. There is a working group ongoing at the moment. I spoke to one of the members of the working group about an hour ago. It is continually being worked on. It's a challenge about balancing clarity, technical content, and bespoke kind of solutions. So where you've got very urban sites or event sites or footprints that may have very challenging noise background levels, and trying to find a solution that works for both regulators, local authorities, and sort of consultants, contractors, and suppliers, and event organisers ultimately. So there are some challenges around getting a solution that fits. But we'll talk about some of the factors that you can think about with noise control. Brings in the concept of music noise levels, M&Ls. We use this acronym M&Ls. And music LAEQs over 15 minutes. So very simply, that's a level average equivalent over 15 minutes. So if you chop up noise over a 15-minute period, that's what an LAEQ is. So we'll use that phrase quite a lot, and that's basically the average, the equivalent average noise over the 15-minute period. Brings in on and off-site noise monitoring, resident noise complaints, the necessity to have a noise management plan, and also having a designated noise consultant who's the single point of contact for noise.
Great, just to jump in again, so can you see the poll results there?
Yes, I think I just closed it. If you could just summarize them.
All right, okay, so roll with in events. So we've got 51% event organizer, 9% local authority, 25% supplier, 42% freelancer, and 5% venue owner. So the majority is we're just over 50% on event organizer, and we've got 4 other kind of different groups as well.
Oh, lovely. Thank you very much. That's really handy. Okay. Okay, so this is where music noise levels, MNLs, and LAQs kind of come in handy. So this is looking at the, this is a 1995 pop code. This is the crux of it, really. If you have 1 to 3 calendar days per, concert days per calendar year per venue, for an urban area, it should generally be 75 dB. Okay, so that's a flat rate that's 1 meter from the facade of the nearest noise sensitive property. We would class noise sensitive property usually as a residential property. I would usually push back if they are saying that offices and commercial premises are deemed as kind of noise sensitive. I don't know what Sue's thoughts are on that.
I think you have to take the context of the site into account, and the hours of it, and the use that it is. But yeah, generally I'd agree with that. Lovely.
And then other urban and rural areas. So this is basically the majority of sites 75 dB. So the vast majority of sites that aren't your kind of typical Twickenham city centre venues specifically designed for this kind of thing would generally be sort of 65. If then you tip into 4 or more calendar days per year, then you're looking at background plus 15. So that would need a little bit of work, and there's a bit of a methodology for how to establish background. I won't go into that. I won't tell you with that. But it's important then to work out background plus 15 decibels, and then we'll come on to some examples where that's been useful. Okay, so good practice, a documented noise management plan, and MP, having music noise level agree with a local authority, and I'd always, as we've talked about with Nick's session about licensing, have that put in as a premises license condition. And depending on the relationship you've got with the local authority or the licensing officer, depends on, and the number of calendar days of events per year, whether it's just your event in that venue or multiple events, will then depend whether they are generous and they let you go with a 75 or 65, or they ask for the kind of 15 dB of background, which, as I say, is a little bit more work, but is certainly kind of easy enough to achieve. Agree off-site monitoring locations. So we've got 3 examples where we've got different off-site monitoring points that we agree with a local authority. Resident letter drop, so resident notification either through letter drops or posters, or notifying the local councillors, ward councillors, or letters in the library is quite a popular one. Having a very clear resident complaint procedure. We'll always try and use the principle of dealing with the complaints in the first place, as opposed to them having to go through to the local authority. Anyone who works in local authority, and probably Sue with her background, is aware that as soon as it goes in, it has to be noted as complaint, and it escalates very, very quickly into a statutory nuisance noise complaint, whereas often it can just be dealt with fairly quickly. With us, it may be that a complaint comes into the event control room, and we can potentially get a level of attenuation if appropriate, and if we're potentially over the music noise level. On that, we tend to use kind of voicemail systems. So you know, as everybody knows, you know, you're on site, it's, you know, you've got front of stage running at 9500 decibels. There's no way that you're going to listen to your mobile phone. So we'll use a voicemail system, put a little voicemail on there, and then that automatically comes through the control room by sort of text message or by email. And then it's just the easier way of kind of collating that information. Also, just say about having a documented sort of command and control structure. So very similar to kind of Jessup, you know, bronze, silver, gold, tactical, strategic, operational. So your front of house sound engineer and updates to event festival organizer and production manager. So everyone is very clear the significance and seriousness of noise. And with my local authority hat on as an EHO, one of the most likely causes of a potential license review is multiple noise complaints and breaching the music noise level noise complaint aspects. You know, the local authority, rightly or wrongly, sometimes won't necessarily care whether your toilets are the right type or whether, you know, the other issues that you are as an event organizer may consider to be significant. It's usually this kind of thing, or, you know, crime and disorder. So it's just being mindful of the significance and the, you know, the veracity that complainants can complain about noise.
Can I jump in there quickly, James?
Absolutely.
Just one thing to add on the complaint line. One of the ways that I've dealt with that on some of our more sensitive sites that I've dealt with is to actually have one of the people that's out monitoring in the community has the phone that takes the messages. So we have a dedicated line going to a mobile phone, and that's held by one of the people that's out in the community monitoring. That enables them to go directly to the area that's affected to see what's going on if it's within the area that we're monitoring. So that can be an alternative sort of approach to that's worked well on some of our more sensitive sites. But I would second what you've just said about the importance of on very many things, not just events, noise complaints. There are a way of people, you know, noise and traffic. They're the things that people can complain about. They're the things that affect people's everyday lives. And I think it's probably worth noting as well that we are noticing across all types of noise that people are becoming more sensitive to it and more likely to complain, possibly than ever before. And so it is a risk to having the licence reviewed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, really, really good points. Really valid points. Thanks, Sue. Just right. Yeah, so very rarely will you ever kind of really need to go. I've only had to do this once or twice, ironically enough, at kind of Christian arts festivals, which are amusing. But having to kind of go down the route of, you know, this is significant enough to either result in a level attenuation or show stopping if you are looking at a level breach beyond the end of your permitted regular entertainment hours on your license. So that's where the command and control and the kind of coordination comes in, that you have to be really critically aware of the importance of not breaching and not overrunning. And I would definitely say for larger scale events, having an overrun procedure, so you're very clear, and everybody, including the licensee and the local authority, are aware of the procedure for what happens if it's likely that you're going to have an overrun. And, you know, if you are looking at doing a show stop or looking at bringing the show down early, then is that going to have resultant implications on crowd management and crowd safety? So an example, so this is Grill Stock. So I did some freelance work for industry partner working in Bristol Harbourside a couple of years ago. So anyone who's worked in this venue will know there's a couple of residents relatively nearby, so kind of 160, 200 metres away. So again, you'd be sort of familiar, Lloyd's Amphitheatre, for those who are kind of local to the southwest. Central Bristol, right on the waterside. And the red square is basically the licensable area, and we kind of occupy Millennium Square and also the amphitheatre area. And then number one, number two are the kind of local nearest residential receptors, and also the two kind of monitoring points that we use for this venue. Okay. So that is Lloyd's Amphitheatre. You can just see the Lloyd's building in the background and the orientation of the stage. And then you can just see the back of the stage and the cow sheds just there. And that's essentially the nearest residential receptor. And there's residents above some of the retail establishments. So it's relatively close. And I appreciate that's to the back, and we do use cardioid subs on this one, so we can try and minimize the backward noise spill. But, you know, you can see, because it's quite a built-up area, there's quite a lot of noise throw backwards on this one. So I'm going to credit Curtis Lakin, who he's an environmental protection team leader over at Mendip District Council. So they have Glastonbury Festival, or did have Glastonbury Festival. These are some of the factors that you can look at to kind of level vary the pop code, so the 65, 75 that we talked about. So looking at the character area, the likely background levels, how established is the venue? Is it a one-off or is it a multiple day event? What's the duration of the event? Again, is it just an afternoon or an evening or a day, or is it a week-long, 10-day festival run? What's the day of the week? One of the future examples I've just come on to had issues with it being a bank holiday weekend at the end of August, and we were getting some pressure from the local authority to maybe kind of bring the show down early on the Sunday night or the Monday night because it's bank holiday. Time of the year, the finish time, so pre or post 11 o'clock. Sue's going to pick up some of the ways you can manage noise from a post 11 o'clock event finish just after this. Again, genre of music, amount of swearing is quite a big issue. We had Goldie Looking Chain play at a gig a couple of years ago, which were fantastic, but when you put them in the middle of a city centre on a Sunday afternoon when kids are playing and every other word is a swear word, it's challenging, shall we say. Desensitization. So some residents are just used to it. They just know that venue is always going to have events and festivals taking place. So you've got that sort of desensitization, which then leads to community acceptance. Okay, so this is Cheltenham Racecourse for anyone familiar, again from sort of Gloucestershire or Southwest. Cheltenham Racecourse had the Gold Cup a couple of weeks ago, just prior to them banning all racing events. Okay, so you can see the racecourse certainly to the south, completely surrounded by residential properties, and also to the north to Southam. So this was an event we're still involved with, have been for years and years and years, and they've now moved over to Kettering. Friday afternoon till Monday evening, 6 outdoor music venues, generally kind of clear span structures, about 20,000 licensed capacity on this one. Several indoor stages and venues, up to and including noise. So a very challenging music kind of combination, and also indoor programming well beyond sort of 11 o'clock, so well into 2, 3, 4 in the morning. And we obviously had a PL from Cheltenham Borough Council. Ironically, surprisingly, we only had a music noise level of 55 dB at the nearest noise sensitive receptor, which when you look at, so this was site plan for 2013, I think it was. So these are the outside external stages. You can see Mage Stage to the northeast of the site, and that was orientated away from the residential. And then the centre course, in the middle of the race course, there were 3 or 4 large venues, kind of big top, and a couple of clear spans. Putting that in context of the nearest residents, you can see the proximity was, I'd say, under 200 metres to the nearest. It was like a beer tent. Okay. So in terms of solution, how do we manage this as a site? Close working relationship with a local authority, with Cheltenham Borough Council. We pre-festival letter dropped to all local towns, villages, hamlets, so that's just over 12,000 letters were sent out to local residents. And as Sue said, there's a number of factors that local residents often, and I'm sure as festival organisers and suppliers, you've probably experienced, traffic management, parking, illegal parking, noise, public urination, that kind of thing. That's what will really piss off the local residents. So this wrapped up noise as well as other issues that residents experienced. Obviously, a documented noise management plan. On-site resident complaint contact line, and that was manned 24 hours. So very similar to how Sue's mentioned, we would have both on and off-site contacts for noise, but with this one, we had a designated member of staff in the control room 24 hours a day who was wholly there to kind of deal with noise issues. Regular, I'd say sort of continuous on and off that monitoring, and continuous and simultaneous through until and above and beyond sort of 2300 hours. And predetermined noise monitoring locations, which were the same as the local authorities. So we were talking the same language, we were talking about the same locations, and there was no confusion as to where we were kind of referring to. It'd be interesting to kind of get Sue's view on this one. So over and above the kind of license monitoring locations, as we talked about with Grillstock, we also offered, and it was kind of requested, an immediate reactive visit to complainants, just to assess the facade music noise level, in addition to those kind of pre-agreed monitoring points. And again, daily review meetings with the licensee, festival director, production manager, to ensure that we were kind of in line with where we should be. Okay, and yeah, so this is again fairly urban/rural. You've got a lot of close proximity to residential, but also you've got some fairly rural areas as well. So these are some of our neighbours. Okay, just breaking that. Sue, any points, observations, or questions, or anything you want to add?
Hi, no, I haven't seen any questions come in yet, actually. Oh, yes, I have. How effective is cardioid setup and other limitations or other factors to take into account when using a certain setup?
Good question. We'll pick that one up at the end. And Brandon, I can always send you some info. Yeah, there are some limitations. There's some really good YouTube videos that pick up cardioid setups. I will certainly put my hand up and say I was many moons ago a sound engineer, but I haven't for quite a few years. So yeah, if we pick that up, make sure you get my email address and I can send you some info on cardioid. That's not a problem. Thanks, Adrian. I'll answer that one. So temp event notices. Yeah, we'll pick that one up at the end. No, pop code isn't relevant to temp event notices. So, if there is no existing premises license conditions that can be carried across to a 10, then it's really kind of best practice. But no, that would only really be if it were a premises license. So GFL, I appreciate probably a lot of people would have been working Glastonbury Festival in June time. So in terms of capacity, so you can see the kind of comparison of population sizes with GFL. Baines is Bath and North East Somerset, sorry, bit of a local acronym. Yeah, so you can see the size of footprint of the site, and then you can see obviously where the line is the pyramid stage. An increasing issue with GFL, as other suppliers probably be able to testify, is the growth of the external campsites. The majority kind of operating around the periphery of the steel shield, around the periphery of the site. Not quite as big as the footprint of the festival itself, but most of them operate under temporary event notice, so there's very limited restrictions you can place on them. So it's just being mindful of the cumulative impact of the festival as well as the external campsites. Okay, so background, so you can see primary noise sources and the power in kilowatts for the stage PAs. Now, rule of thumb, and I'm sure that any sound engineer will probably throw something at me, but a rule of thumb for kind of 1.5 watts per person, and you can then calculate that according to the capacity for each kind of venue or front of house capacity, gives you a bit of a very, very rough rule of thumb, back of a fag packet kind of calculation for PA size, and some figures there in terms of the noise kind of exposure. Okay, so audience exposure, so this is another factor. So this is where taking into account music noise levels that are below 95 dBA, so it's 95 decibels A-weighted at the front house position, are unlikely to provide satisfactory entertainment for the audience. However, clearly the front house distance varies. So anyone who's worked in Trafalgar Square, picture here of Pride, London, knows that front house usually is up on the terrace, so that's a good sort of bit of distance from the stage. And that can be anything from 25, 7,500 meters. Okay. So venues with just one event per year or a high value, or if you've got community acceptance, or there may be financial sort of input from the community, you know, maybe that they are profiteering from this event taking place, maybe an increased music noise level, and therefore an increased audience exposure experience. But again, that's just discussion, and it's discussion with the local authority, EHO, and the licensing team. So just a bit of backup for that point. So some acoustic theory. So this is equal loudness contours, so Fletcher-Munson curve. Very, very simply, without going into the acoustic maths, which I'll probably defer to Sue on, if you look at where the red arrow is, that's about 95 dB, 95 decibels. That is generally recognised, so that's a 40 Fon Fletcher-Munson curve. That's kind of one of the flattest curves. So that's basically equal loudness contours equal about 9,500 decibels. Most of the frequencies are the flattest. So that's a bit of acoustic theory to kind of back up why 9,500-ish is generally kind of regarded as the, or sort of 95 is regarded as kind of the best, or one of the best kind of music noise levels for satisfactory entertainment. Okay, it's about the flattest. So all the different frequencies are kind of relatively level. Okay, so the weather can influence where sites are chosen for monitoring, and also the site of obviously the event and the front of house. Music noise levels can vary quite considerably by up to 15 dB. So 10 dB is a doubling of noise level. So 15 is quite a significant difference. It's logarithmic decibels. So your sub bass, which is kind of your 63 to 125 and less noise complaints, are very, very weather dependent. You know, we've had sites where the sub is fully compliant on the background, on the border or the boundary of the site. If you then go 2 miles back away from the site, you know, you are, you know, 15, 20 dB above where you were on the boundary. Okay, and that's just the point that bass can come to ground almost anywhere. Okay. So that's a couple of bits of acoustic theory around sort of noise transference and reflection. And this is often, you know, you can use the natural topography of the site and natural kind of factors that you've got. If you've got kind of venues within a park that you can kind of fire noise at hillsides and things to try and limit some of the transmission, then there's some options there. Okay, so just another example. So this is Weaverfield over in East London. So this was some noise planning that we put in place for an event a couple of years ago, just picking up the commercial, non-residential. So we talked about what we would consider to be a noise-sensitive receptor, and also the residential receptors. So residential in kind of pinky red. Okay, and then just recognize or picking up the green blobs, some proposed monitoring locations, and you can see the 2 main venues. So these are kind of you know, trailer stage sort of structures, and you can look at, I think there's some distances there for proximity to residential. You can certainly see the north of the site very, very close to residential from that northern stage there. Okay, so barrier attenuation can be really effective. This echo barrier, so there's lots of other manufacturers available. So Echo are one of the first ones to bring this out. This is essentially a heavy woolen, you know, almost like rock wool type material within a waterproof container, which you can hook and cable tie onto Harris fencing. We managed to get about a 15-20 dB attenuation on a generator in a campsite, which kept getting switched off by campers because they couldn't sleep because the generators were on to power the lighting and the shower pumps, etc. Stuck a load of this stuff around the Harris and didn't get any problems again. So, you know, really simple attenuation, and we do recommend this for generators and plant and tower lights in campsites where, you know, you have to have them on for safety purposes, but it can really mitigate the noise. Okay, Sue is going to pick up low frequency noise just afterwards. I don't know if you wanted to jump in now, Sue, and talk about low frequency.
Yeah, I might as well, since you've got the screen there. So the levels that you've got in there are from the pop code, I think, and I think what's really important to remember with these is they are really only applicable at a distance from the site, usually at 1 to 2 kilometres away. If they're closer than that, then they're not applicable. It's where the reason for it being at a distance is that these tones, if you like, of low frequency noise become more noticeable as you've got less other sort of broadband noise in the area. So that's why it tends to cause an issue. The other thing that I do with low frequency noise is to look on the noise meters that we have now. You can have the 3rd octave band frequencies, and those will show you if you've got one frequency that's significantly above the others in that area. So we use that sometimes to sort of adjust a tone. So it seems to be a thing at the moment around the 40-50 hertz is it's something that the sound engineers really like to have in their mix. With a friendly sound engineer, you can sometimes get them to tweak something like the 40-50 hertz, take that down, 2 or 3 dB without changing the overall sound front of house. It's not that noticeable within the audience, but it's really noticeable off site. And if you can reduce some of those annoying tones, particularly in the low frequency, then that can actually reduce the overall annoyance and risk of complaints. It's a really subjective thing, but we've found that that's been quite a helpful approach to use. I don't think I've got anything else to add on that. Some local authorities will set specific limits on specific frequencies, but as James was saying, we're waiting for the new pop code to come out to see whether they actually address the low frequency noise with some more specific guidance.
Lovely, cool. Thanks very much, Sue. That's really helpful clarification. So yeah, low frequency noise. So speaking to one of the members of the working group, so that's the Code of Practice on Environmental Noise Control of Concerts, pop code working group. There is a drive to look at low frequency noise more. And for those who are interested, they're looking at using or potentially using C weightings, so taking account of frequency response. So at the moment, all these LAEQs, level average equivalent, A weighted, so A weighted measurements. If you kind of switch over to C, there's a slightly different approach for low frequency noise, so they're looking at that. But as you can appreciate, there's lots of different industry and regulator views as to what's appropriate, so it's challenging. Yeah, so the joy of noise monitoring, you'd either be in a field or you'll be a front house position in a big top, or you'll be in East London dealing with dead mouse on a roof, or actually that's not dead mouse, that's a rigger, because we couldn't get dead mouse to be insured to climb on the roof. Or using external noise. So noise monitoring can be pretty pragmatic and sensible, and I'd always say keep it simple. Yes, there's a lot of very complicated acoustic maths, and there's people with PhDs in acoustics and professors of acoustics, but ultimately keep it simple and keep the approach kind of simple. Just going to touch really quickly on controlling noise at work, just because it kind of relates quite often to environmental noise. So you're probably all familiar with Controlling Noise at Work Regs 2005 with the 80, 85, 87 exposure levels. Okay, so we love a good traffic light scheme within events. So this picks up the lower and upper action levels, and potential risk assessment and mitigation or management at those various action levels. This is really useful. We use this quite a lot in training and with sort of crew briefings. the average noise level within a venue and the time it takes to receive a dose equivalent to the upper action level. So we looked at 85. So that's, you should be looking at noise reduction, ear protection zones, reducing noise level at source. So if you look at 85, it can take you about 8 hours. So you're talking about a working day, maybe a 12-hour, 8-hour day at 95. If you go up to 105, 110 dB, and I think a lot of you work in nightclubs, you'll probably be able to hit 100, 105, 110 kind of within the nightclub environment. You can, without hearing protection or management, you can hit your daily dose equivalent to the upper exposure level within 2 minutes or even 30 seconds. So it's really important to look at management of noise from a health and safety perspective as well as environmental. So this was one really simple mitigation approach we put in place. You can see on the left-hand photo, you can see some subs and some mojo barrier. So these are some volunteer stewards who were very keen, not wearing hearing protection or wearing it badly, stood because they felt like they were cool, stood in front of the speaker in the pit, because obviously, it's cool to stand in the pit. And they were getting exposure of, 110, I think. So you can see how quickly they were getting their daily exposure level. So we did some back calculations. We did some acoustic maths very simply. And we got them to stand where you can see these little stewards stand here with the little feet. Now, that managed to get almost a 10 dB attenuation just by very simply moving them by 2 or 3 meters to one side. It wasn't affecting their operational kind of delivery of the role. They didn't have to stand in front of the speakers as much, and it meant that even if they weren't wearing effective hearing protection, then we got it down to, as I say, kind of 87 dB. So you can see here, that's going to take significantly longer for them to reach their daily exposure level than if they were in a higher environment. That's just one little example of some mitigation you can do, which ultimately, is protecting volunteers. So that wraps that up, really. If I pass over to Sue.
Okay, yeah, so the only thing that I think I was going to add was a little bit on what happens after 11 p.m. So I can't share my screen. So after 11 o'clock, you will have much tighter noise limits. Some local authorities might be a bit more lenient and start them after midnight, but generally speaking, after 11, it's going to be more heavily scrutinised and tighter on the limits. The POP code talks about it being inaudible in a bedroom with a window open for normal ventilation. There's been some research that's been done since then, because inaudible, when you're stood outside, you're not in the bedroom, you can't hear what they can hear, so you can't really determine it. But it correlates roughly to about 45 dB on that LEQ that James was talking about at the beginning. And so most of the events that I work on where we're operating after 11 o'clock, that's what we work to, is that 45. So there's two things to sort of note with that. 45 is really low, and actually on a breezy evening in an area with trees, you'll probably be hitting that without any music noise. So one of the things that we always recommend that our teams do is that we get a measurement without music noise, or with as little music noise as possible, either before or during the event, just to agree with the local authority that this is how much we need to take off the overall noise to get to be sure of what our music noise level is. And the other thing to do is really to make sure that you're aware of all your noise sources on site, and what is contributing to what's off site. And again, we find that the busiest hour of our evening on these events is really between 11 and, well, from about 10:30 to about 11:30, getting into position and just making sure that the funfares are down as low as is feasible, and that you're giving as much headroom to the stages that are still operating. The only other thing that I would say is that if you're an event organiser, please consider your programming after 11 o'clock. I think the hardest night that I've ever had was when somebody had programmed a bagpipe stomp band on one of the small stages at 11:30 at night, and that was one of the nights that we just couldn't get compliance. It just wasn't possible with that. level of it was a fantastic show, but it was not really compatible with a 45 decibel limit off-site. So that's just something to consider. It can be really difficult to get the levels down and have a level that the audience will enjoy when you've got to be effectively, if you think about it as being practically inaudible off-site, it can be a challenge. And my other bit of advice really is just to make sure that you're talking to the local authority all the way through the events. They know what you're doing to try and get compliance, and they can see that you're doing what you can, that you're working with the sound engineers, that you're working with the event organisers, that you're aware of the limits and you know, the weather conditions and all that sort of thing. So that's, I think that's really all I have to say about that.
Lovely. What I'm going to do very briefly is I'll try and find, I've got a link and I'll be able to share the hot code with people. Just bear with me.
While you're doing that, James, maybe Sue might be able to answer a couple of the Q&As that are sitting there. I don't know if you can see them. Or do you want me to?
Yeah, no, I've got them. I'll run through them. So we've done the one about the cardioid setup. We've talked about TENs and carnival parades. I think the thing with things like carnival parades is that they are, as they're moving through, they're only in an area for, you know, a lot of the guidance, the pop code, it's set for events that are running for 8-10 hours a day. And so you've got this 15-minute limit that you're, you know, because it's thinking about what people are being exposed to for a whole day. I'm not aware of any on floats and things. I don't know if you are, James. I know the pop code's not applicable, but I'm not really aware of anything. It tends to, whenever I've done things like carnivals, it's been the stage at the end that everybody's congregated at that we've dealt with, rather than the parade itself.
Yeah, hi Catherine. No, challenging, and I appreciate, I probably know the event you're sort of referring to there. Challenging one. All I can say is I think as we've looked at, probably limit or try and get them to limit the sub. I appreciate that a lot of floats are going to try and go fairly sub heavy and you know, fairly significant equipment from the low frequency noise aspect, which obviously is going to cause more of an issue to residents. But I think, as Sue said, you know, it's relatively short duration. There's going to be, as long as they're not sort of a static float, you know, if they can be moved along. And I think it's about wider management of the event to and if they are noisy and if it's challenging to be able to get them to attenuate, you need to kind of try and get the floats moving as much as you can.
I think again with carnivals, it's quite often noise is the thing that people can complain about, and actually it's not always actually the noise in and of itself that's the issue. Sometimes it's the, I don't know if you find this, James, but sometimes it's the event that's the issue rather than the noise per se. It's just that's the thing that they know that they can complain about, and as you say, I think just keeping things moving along. And there was one event that I used to work on. It wasn't a carnival. It was a festival. But I found if people could see my team out monitoring, that helped reduce the number of complaints. There was a specific complainant. If she could see my guy in a high vis jacket with a noise meter, she wouldn't complain. If he popped round the corner or went off for a break, that would be when she would pick up the phone. And it was. I've found it on a few events now that they can see that you're managing the noise. That can go, again, it's that psychological sort of effect of if they can see that you're managing the noise, they can feel a bit more relaxed that it's not going to go mental. There is somebody there and somebody is doing something about it, and that can help. Yeah,
absolutely agree. I'll certainly pick up. I certainly agree with that point. So I think, you know, don't be afraid. You know, in terms of kind of event organisers as employing sort of noise consultants or having people managing noise, don't be afraid. You know, you don't need to be covert. You know, be quite overt. You know, stand there in high vis, be quite obvious, as it were. You know, as long as it's safe, you know, to do so, and be quite obvious. I would just raise a point. Actually, just thinking about that, I've done some noise monitoring in East London a couple of weeks ago, where I didn't go on site without SIA protection. Because there's a big spate at the moment with survey equipment being stolen, and there's a couple of particular gangs who are kind of specifically stealing survey and noise monitoring equipment. So just from a kind of risk assessment, just be kind of cautious of that. You know, sound kit, you know, these kind of things, are worth, you know, £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 each. So just be very mindful of you know, that kind of kit going walkies. The second point as well is, I think, as Sue's mentioned, don't be afraid, you know, to sort of have a chat with complainants. You know, if there's a particular issue that they are experiencing or they're kind of challenged by, you know, it's often that just let them have a rant, have a chat with you, make them a cup of tea, give them a free ticket to the event if appropriate, and you can usually calm them down that way. Which, when they don't get a response from the event, they escalate to the local authority, and then you end up in the license review situation, which, you know, could have almost been avoided by just having a chat and sitting down and so on.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I find we spend a lot of our time talking to members of the public, and they'll let us know everything they love or hate about the event. In that conversation, it will never be just about noise. It will be about everything else, and the other events that are held there, and what normally goes on. And you know, I remember talking to somebody near a racecourse event I went to, and they didn't mind the tannoys from the racing because that's what they'd signed up for when they bought the house near the racecourse, but they really didn't like the music. And yeah, so it's things like that. I've noticed somebody else has always, Ben Wilson has also chipped in that as a local authority, you do get to know the difference between general and serial complainants with events, and I think that's true as well. But the serial ones can take up a lot of time.
Yeah, very much. And I think it really comes down to that conversation that we've had and Sue's raised about a level of transparency with the local authority and trying to get that positive working relationship. So as Ben said, you know, you can have the chat, and obviously within GDPR and data protection and all the rest of it, and they will not, as a rule, be able to tell you the complainants that they are being contacted by, you know, obviously because of they are a statutory complainer. But they will often, if you say, oh, Mrs. Jones at 23 High Street, and they'll kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, here we go again. So you can kind of get that the working relationship with the local authority positively to try and kind of manage serial complainers. John, I'm just trying to type a response to you. 0700 to 2300 is referred to as daytime. So you've asked about any times other than 11 o'clock. If you've got a multi-day event, usually wouldn't be looking to start noise till maybe 9. I don't know what Sue's thoughts are, but sort of 8, 9 o'clock in the morning at the earliest. Certainly other standards, British standards, refer to 7 a.m. as the start of daytime. So anything before that is kind of night time.
Yeah, I mean, construction sites you generally don't have work starting till 8. License can say that you can't do sound propagation tests before, say, 10 a.m. Obviously, it depends what time your festival is due to be starting, but I would have said 1 or 2 hours before your program time. Anything more than that will probably generate complaints because residents are ready for the 12 o'clock start. They're not ready for the 10 o'clock start, so which is how they perceive it to be. So I think it's taking, again, it's all about the context of the event and how late it finished last night before it starts again, and what sort of breaks you're giving people.
Guys, I'm going to jump in.
There's a couple about weather, but I'll reply to those.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you can answer them via type, if that's all right, because I'd love to get John on now as we're cruising along. Sorry for jumping in, but thanks so much. That was brilliant. I think.
Thank you very much for having us.
I really appreciate it. It was you went deep into the geek. It was brilliant.
What I've done, Rupert, is just put a link up there in the chat for it's a HubSpot link for getting a copy of the pop code. So I've seen a flurry coming through. I'll email it over to people later on today. Okay.
Brilliant.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. Thank you, Sue.